Please help me welcome to the stage Suzanne Barakat. Come on in. You have your choice.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome.
Thank you.
So let's start. Let's start with tell everyone who you are and kind of what is your story and what do you do?
Well, unlike most of you, I'm not in the tech world, actually. I'm a physician by day. I did my family medicine residency training just across the street over at UCSF, San Francisco General Hospital. We were primarily focused on serving marginalized and vulnerable patient populations. And now, since finishing, I've been attending in the East Bay, where I work as a hospitalist, basically admitting patients from the emergency room into the hospital, delivering babies, and doing primary care. So that's my day job. And when I'm not doing that or being a mom to an adorable toddler who consumes every bit of my energy, I work for an organization called R3 Winners Foundation, whose mission is to counteract the rising tide of Islamophobia.
Awesome. Can you talk a little bit about how you got where you are today and what motivates you? What motivates you to do the work that you do?
Well, this is never the easy part to talk about. I was an intern in residency, and on February 10th, 2015, while on call in the hospital, I learned that my baby brother, Dia, who was 23, a second-year dental student at UNC Chapel Hill, his wife of 6 weeks, Yusur, we had just been in North Carolina celebrating their wedding, who also had just gotten accepted to join him at UNC Dental School, and her younger sister, Suzanne, who was visiting for dinner, were murdered execution style in their college town apartment by their neighbor who professed to disliking the way they looked because of their hijab. So that kind of started me on a very different path and why I'm not just doing the medicine thing. But my baby brother was more than just a baby brother. I was kind of a second mom to him. I was his mentor in many ways and his best friend. We had kind of a tradition where I'd go up to his bedroom after everyone had gone to sleep, and it was the big sister way of prying secrets out of him, but also it became our way of connecting. And just 10 days before everything happened, I was back in North Carolina for a quick trip, and he was eager and excited and pulled out his laptop and said, "I have something to show you." And he pulled out his CV, which was formatted exactly after mine, and he was doing all these amazing things in leadership and community service and was preparing for a dental refugee relief trip with Yusur for that summer, and I was just blown away, seeing this, what used to be this little kid who was transformed to this 6'3" young man with so many accomplishments who looked up to me for, a sense of approval and pride, and I told him that day that I've never been more proud of you than I am in this moment, and that was the last conversation we had. So that's why I do what I do.
I'm sorry. And how did you recover and use that as motivation? How did you get from that place of sadness, trauma, and the hate behind all of that? How did you move beyond that and use that as motivation? How did you get there?
I think any sane person would have wanted to just retreat and process. I was here in San Francisco. It was 7 p.m. when I learned the news and got on a red eye that connected through JFK, and I remember sitting in the terminal and watching CNN and Fox and just at a loss for words with anger and confusion, 3 American Muslim students were killed in the safety of their home, execution style, and there wasn't a blip of coverage on the news, let alone the local news. And by the time I land in North Carolina, the police authorities had released a premature statement taking the words of the murderer who turned himself in, saying, "Oh, I did this because of a parking dispute." We've learned later through investigation reports and autopsy reports, there was no parking dispute. But the fact that those words were taken and became the media piece that, through a 24-hour media cycle, tell us about this parking dispute. That's what kind of thrust me forward, that we had to take back the narrative. And during the press statement that our family delivered in the immediate hours afterwards, we made an ask that this be investigated as a hate crime. And that was the first time that term was even used in the media coverage. So taking back that narrative was really important. But to answer your question, I don't really think I felt like I had a choice.
Mm-hmm.
If I wasn't going to be sharing my story, then someone else was going to be sharing theirs on behalf of me.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about Islamophobia so everybody kind of understands what all is happening in the world while it was happening even in San Francisco around that? I think that's something that we don't talk about a lot, and I think it's important for us to think about our colleagues in the workplace, our neighbors in the city, our neighbors across the country and the world. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, the data suggests that, and this is looking at FBI statistics and whatnot, and we know that a lot of these cases are actually super underreported, but hate crimes against American Muslims are on the rise faster for that group than any other minority group in this country. And we know since 2015, since the murders of my family, the number of anti-Muslim hate groups have tripled. We also know, looking at the statistics and the data, that hate crimes against Muslims rise in parallel with presidential elections, not just with Trump. But take our current political situation, when you have the highest ranking leader of our country proactively demonizing an entire group of people, calling for a Muslim ban, a travel ban against an entire group of people, that then becomes upheld by the highest court of the land, how can it not become the next socially acceptable form of bigotry? And I find that people aren't even aware of what Islamophobia really is. It hasn't yet picked up the kind of the social justice theme behind it, that this is something that is real, that is lethal, that we all have a part in playing a role against its rise.
And what are some of the things that you are doing in your work now? I know you're doing quite a bit of work even in San Francisco, and I think that, talk about what the work you're doing a little bit.
So there's, with my training as a family medicine doc and working with refugee patient populations and the underserved patient populations, there was kind of activism on that front. I had a lot of patients who had PTSD as political asylees. This is a sanctuary city, and it was remarkable to see during the election period how many of my patients would no-show, how many of their medical conditions actually worsened tremendously. They were fearful of coming on buses, fearful for their safety. The clinic had posters with, saying all people are welcome here, and they had pictures of people with hijab to try and cross some of those barriers. But that trauma is real. Feel that sense of persecution, and when you turn on the TV and that's what you're seeing, that's an entire group of people that's essentially voiceless, that has been pretty ignored within this total narrative. And then there's the work that I do with the R3 Winners Foundation, which is really trying to just raise awareness about Islamophobia, about the lethal impact it has, and just what it is that we can do as individuals, as institutions, to counteract it.
What can a lot of us work in tech companies or in the tech industry. What can we all do to be better allies for our Muslim colleagues in the workplace?
I think you can break it down into two things. There's what we can do as individuals, day to day, within our work, at home as neighbors, as parents, to children who have friends who are Muslim. And then there's the institutional side. And I think as individuals, there's an onus on all of us to stand up for one another. And what does that mean? I've, training at UCSF, it's very much, the mission is social justice. And I love my peers. They loved me. They were very supportive of when I came back and became kind of a vocal advocate on campus on raising awareness about Islamophobia, how to deal with microaggressions, either from patients or attendings or other faculty and staff. And yet, I still encountered situations where a patient was blatantly telling me, "You're a terrorist, you're killing people in Los Angeles," and my entire team, from my senior leaders to my junior reports, being completely silent and being completely baffled at, what have I just done? Having to tell you and try and explain what it is to experience this and what it is that would mean so much for you to stand up in that moment. And it taught me a lot that, most people are actually very well intended. These situations are very uncomfortable, and we need to be equipped with two things: the tools to respond in the moment, but also an internal recognition of our own implicit biases that we're not always privy to and aware of. So kind of a key thing that I take away is, if you see something that doesn't sit right with you, prime yourself with a statement like, "Hey, that's not okay." It'll give you that extra couple seconds to think in that moment, how should I respond? How is that uncomfortable? What would be the appropriate thing to say? And flipping it back at me, I had a situation not long after this where I was rotating at Kaiser, showing up to a new place. Within 5 minutes, I'm shadowing a new attending, and the patient looks at her, and I've only just met this attending, and says, "Are you a woman? You look like a man." A completely inappropriate interaction to happen anywhere, let alone in the workplace. And she's my senior, right? So there's already this discomfort and this hierarchy, and what do you say? And it was so easy for me to see in that moment how you can just be quiet. And I just told myself, say what you always said to say. "Hey, that's not okay, that's really inappropriate." It may not change much for the patient's way of thinking, but it meant a lot to whoever my colleague was, or
Absolutely.
my senior or my junior, in feeling supported, feeling like they had an ally, and not feeling alone in that really discriminatory moment. So that's what we can do as individuals. But I think what's more important, and I think we can take away from even in this gathering, institutionally, there's institutional awareness, and then there's institutional accountability. And with awareness, I think, taking the analogy of the Me Too movement, what was so powerful with it is it raised awareness about the fact that 1 in 3 women are sexually abused, and a lot of men didn't really know that. And bringing that into the conscious of people to recognize. A similar kind of thing needs to happen with Islamophobia. I don't think a lot of people really know that this is a thing. This is a thing that happens, and I would say more than probably 1 in 3. Every American Muslim I know who works in the professional sphere has encountered this. So what does that mean? And examples that UCSF has taken that I thought were really great, they held a grand rounds, which is kind of comparable to the tech sphere, to maybe a mandatory all hands that you have to attend. And then, they started holding implicit bias trainings for faculty and staff. There was the classic, I would try and caution folks from taking the approach of, let's sit and have a sit-down chat with the person who said this really hurtful thing to you and offended you. That's not the way to, it's not on me to sit and teach my perpetrator how not to say that again. That needs to change, and that's where the institutional accountability comes in, to really take ownership and making sure that all people feel safe and included.
Last question, and then I want to bring the other panelists on, is so you have gone through trauma yourself, and you also work with patients who have gone through trauma. How do you take care of yourself in all of that? How do you make sure that you're okay?
A hell of a lot of therapy. And that is first and foremost. I think, I'm very open about the fact that I've been diagnosed with PTSD. It's been a very humbling experience it's one thing to know the DSM criteria and diagnose it with patients and treat their symptoms. It's another altogether to experience the complete limitations that it can have out of your control, the triggers that are unannounced, the timing that seems to not make sense. So definitely therapy, medications if needed, and strong social support, which is not easy to always develop, whether it's family or friends, and having a culture at work that can understand it and support it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing your
Thank
experience.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.